them to speak about is how does being a Christian inform your professional life, your personal life, everything in between. We are very blessed to have John and Blanche offer their time with us. So please welcome them.
Well, we're on our own. John, I'm glad we come to this with such great credentials. And thank you all for your willingness to be here. If there's anything I have learned, it is that we need more conversations, whether it's among ourselves or within our church body or our church home or our United States Congress and the leaders of our nation. So I'm proud to be here, and I know John is. Now, Andrew, you just want us to talk?
And I have, this is Michael, and for those of you who know your Constitution, Article 1 is the legislative branch, and Article 2 is the executive branch. So the legislative branch always goes first.
Oh, it's just that chivalry's not dead. I know that. Well, I'm delighted to be here to share with you some of my experiences. And mine really did start in the Episcopal Church. I grew up in a small church in the Mississippi Delta of Arkansas. It's one of the oldest Episcopal churches west of the Mississippi. And I come from a long line of lifelong Episcopalians. It was a warm church, a great place to grow up. There's still guilt in me right now that I'm not teaching Sunday school this year because those types of experiences for me were very formative. The junior choir, memorized. I sing a song of the saints of God. You know, we got cupcakes that had chocolate filling in the middle if we got all the words right. But just wonderful opportunities to share with my church family and to grow up in that church family, but also in a small town where the Presbyterians did the best musicals for the youth, and the Methodists had the best youth group, and the synagogue, which was catty corner from the Episcopal Church, we shared youth group, Episcopalians and the Jewish synagogues. The Baptists had the best vacation Bible school, so we shared in our religious community in that small town. And I came to the legislative branch not because I come from a political family, but really through total naivety. It never occurred to me that I wasn't supposed to run for office as a young single woman, particularly growing up in a very male-dominated congressional district. But I was raised by parents who were amazing. Within my church family and within my birth family, my dad was amazing. He served as an infantryman in Korea. And he said, I haven't raised a bunch of whiners. He said, all four of you, I'm the youngest of four. He said, if you're complaining about something and you're whining about it, I expect you to be out there working hard to change it and make it better. So don't come home whining about things. And when I came home as a young single woman, having worked in Washington for several years, and said, I'm going to run for Congress. And I'm going to run against your former fraternity brother, who's in the leadership in the Democratic primary. And he looked at me and said, oh my God, I think I've done too good a job already. But I ran because I believed in what I had to offer, not because I wanted to point out the negativities of my opponent, but because I really felt strongly in what I had to offer. I was a former staffer, and as a former staffer, I learned a tremendous respect for the operations of congressional offices, the committee process that allows us to vet and to have oversight from the executive branch.
A little too much for that sometimes.
But it was a great opportunity to look for where the best solution is, the bipartisan solution, the solution working with an administration regardless of what party you were from. It was that conversation, and I thrived on that. I don't have a degree in law I have a degree in biology because I thought I was going to nursing school. But I ended up in Congress. And then with the wonderful help of my husband, Steve, was elected to the United States Senate with twin 2-year-olds. Boy, did they not know what they were getting into. An interesting thing for many of my colleagues at the time, and that was back in 1998 when I was serving with Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms and Danny Inouye and men who didn't really think about what families were doing. They had big buddies in the Senate, and it was a good thing. And I wanted to be their buddy. I did. Because I knew that was how things got done. Was when people became friends, they had respect for one another. And when they respected one another, they worked together. And so, again, the blessing of my husband, I couldn't travel, which was where then most members made their good friends, was in traveling abroad to 10, 12-day trips. I asked my husband, I said, whenever there's an event, a dinner, I really would like for us to go as a family and really participate. And I would always sit us at a table that were people we didn't know very well. And more than once, we ended up next to Bernie Sanders.
Did you feel the burn?
He burned me a time or two, particularly on Walmart. But it was a way to get to know each other and, again, respect our differences. To build friendships based on respect, not on differences. And so that was really my effort, was to make those things happen. And I know that whenever I was up against tremendous things, again, the advice of my husband, things are never as bad as you think, and they're never as good as you think. And I hope we will all look forward after Tuesday with that attitude, is that they're never as bad, they're never as good. We all have work to do. And so I certainly pledged myself to that, and I'm hoping that as a Christian family here at St. Mary's that we will all do that too. So a little bit of my history, there's a whole lot more that I could tell, but I'm going to leave it over to John, and then maybe we can have a conversation about some of the things that we have experienced.
Great. Well, thanks, Blanche, and thank you all for coming out. Andrew, thanks for convening us. I will say a word about myself and then sort of get us into some of the difficult choices one has to make in government, and then I think maybe we'll allow enough time not only for your questions, but also about what we can all do as Christians, as Episcopalians, after the election, where I think there will probably be some sort of a need for a healing process. So I am, as Andrew mentioned, a cradle Episcopalian. My mother is here. I am from a family of public servants, a long line of Army officers. I was the first in my family in more than 100 years not to go to West Point, but I still had public service in my blood. My mother was worked at the CIA, so I got this all fairly honestly to have both the Defense Department and the CIA sort of national security in my blood. I went to, as Andrew said, an Episcopal school, St. Albans, whose motto was pro ecclesia et pro patria, for the church and for the state. And that's something that was always very meaningful for me, and it's something that I want to come back to, is sort of how we can, in an appropriate way and not an inappropriate way, sort of bring the church and the state together so that they are not on just completely two parallel paths ignoring one another. But I will come back to that. I've spent most of my career in executive branch agencies, except for 1 year testing it out up at the Senate when I worked for the Senate Intelligence Committee. I did actually intern for our great senator of our state, John Warner, who was truly a wonderful, wonderful man and who had a great influence on me. But I cycled through, I think, 5 different executive branch agencies, the CIA, the Justice Department, 4 years at the White House, 4 years at the State Department. I was Condoleezza Rice's lawyer for all 8 years, and actually one of the reasons that I stayed in for 8 years was that I was very loyal to her. I was in the Situation Room on 9/11, searing for me as the White House hunkered down, the White House was evacuated. I was one of the few people who stayed in the Situation Room. My job was actually to advise the president on whether he had the legal authority to shoot down the civilian aircraft that were coming at the White House. This was not something I had learned in law school, and actually I did consult other lawyers rather than just pull it out of thin air. We did actually tell the president that he had the legal authority to shoot down a civilian aircraft, but unfortunately he didn't have to do that. But in those with our older daughter, who is sitting over here, yes, the one waving, and so a lot has changed and a lot has not at St. Mary's. Many of you know the church used to be facing the other direction. I was part of the group that decided to change it around, looking the direction that it's now facing. The one bit of constancy, in addition to Claudia Boswell, is Andrew Merrow. When we came in, and actually my wife was pregnant, and we were looking for churches 26 years ago, and there was this youthful rector presiding over a congregation of maybe about 20 people. So you can see the rector is still youthful, but the congregation has grown. So I think that will tell you something. In seriousness, though, it was a very difficult time for me. In the White House, we were working around the clock for really was 7 days, pretty much 18 hours a day in the 9/11 period and onward. And one needed to look for a source of strength outside. And when I was able to come to church on Sunday mornings, although Sundays were work days, I would try to come in and go to church in the morning. And I got a lot of solace out of many of the people in this room, as well as from the prayers of the people. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I always felt that for interestingly, not all of the forms of the prayers of the people talk about government. I think only 3 of the 6 refer to government. So I'm always in favor of the prayers of the people that include the reference to prayers for those who hold positions of public trust and pray for their wisdom and courage. And I always felt that spoke to me, and I always felt so supported when somewhat beaten down I would be leaving service in the morning to be heading down to the White House, and people would come up to me and put their arms around me and say, "We're there thinking of you." So this has always been very important for those of us in public life. I don't like to see a complete separation of church and state in that regard. I don't think the state ought to be establishing any religion, but at the same time, the community that we have here at St. Mary's can be very supportive of those. And I have drawn from my Episcopal roots. At one point, this actually ended up in a book somewhere, when I was trying to persuade Secretary Rice to change administration policy on something that I thought that we had gotten wrong. I actually wrote her a memo and quoted from one of the great Episcopal hymns, which unfortunately is one of the few that's been taken out of the 1940 hymnal. How many of you all were raised on the 1940 hymnal? All right, so then you're going to know this one. This was "Once to every man a nation," and it was taken out because it was supposedly theologically unsound, but there are a lot of great lyrics to it, and I wrote to Secretary Rice because, as many of you know, I was constantly fighting some of my more ideological colleagues, and I wrote to her in a memo. I said, quoting from the beginning of that hymn, "Once to every man a nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth and falsehood, for the good or evil side." Now, those are James Russell Lowell's fairly, purple lyrics, but in government, you often, the choices are hard, and you have to stand up sometimes and try to make the hard decisions. It's almost never, as Blanche knows, between sort of a easy decision and a wrong decision. Most of the decisions that you have to make, there are always going to be downsides to them, and you're going to get hammered either way. But I'm sort of drawing on my schooling in the Episcopal Church and the community of St. Mary's. I pulled from some of the values that I had here. Now, it's a little bit easier for me because Secretary Rice was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, so I don't know whether they have that hymnal in the Presbyterian hymnal. I knew that this would also speak to her. So why don't I stop there, and maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the healing that we're going to have to be heading to after Tuesday.
Well, I think there will be a need for a lot of healing, and I think there will be a need for a lot of us. As Christians, we have not only the teaching, but the wonderful opportunity to make a difference in the needs of these healing moments in our country and in our societies, in our homes. We have a great opportunity in the millennials. They are amazing. I've got 2 of them at home, and they're real amazing. They're smart, they're passionate, they're not very possessive. Possessions are not a big part of them. You just got to get them to show up. And that's the big thing. It is truly the thing, is to point out how all of these things make a difference, but they don't make a difference if you don't show up. If you don't show up at the game, or if you don't show up at the polls, or you don't show up where you can make a difference in not only what you do and what you say. And so we've got a huge opportunity to help mold and shape that next generation. John mentioned 9/11. For me, 9/11 was certainly less of what the response and what he was dealing with, which again, were not issues of black and white, but a lot of gray and figuring out where and how we had to stand as a nation. But for me, that morning when I looked out my window, I had an appointment in my office, and I saw the smoke coming up from the Pentagon. And my first instinct was these children working in my office. My dad used to always say, he said, when he'd come see me as a staffer, he'd say, there are children running this country. And I said, yep, that's all this country can afford right now. Because these young people work cheap, And it's true, these congressional staffs, and they were all young. We divided them up immediately, sent them to houses. We asked them each to have a team captain, call the state office, make sure the people in the state office know who's in that house, have them call their parents at home so that their parents know that they're in a safe place. And there were 3 of us left. And my chief of staff and my ledge director, and all 3 of us lived in Virginia. And my ledge director kept coming to me because she had young children. And I kept telling her, I said, a parent's gut trumps everything. If you are worried, if there's something wrong going on in your mind and in your heart about your child, go do something about it. And she didn't, she hesitated. Finally she went, and then my chief of staff and I left, and I was driving a big, huge Suburban at the time, parked in the bottom of the Dirksen parking garage. We get in and immediately find ourselves in a traffic jam inside the parking garage. And I say, uh-oh, and he looked at me and said, no, don't say uh-oh. Uh-oh what? I said, I'm almost out of gas. He said, only you. Our nation has been attacked and we're stuck in a parking garage with no gas. Only you. But we made it out. We got across the bridge, but I go back to my ledge director, and she looked at me several days later, and she said, I went to get my child, and he was the last one in daycare. He had been put into an evacuation crib, which is a cage, and they were wheeling him into the basement. And I said, I'm just telling you, God gives parents an unbelievable knack of knowing when their kids need them. And you know what? We are children of God. God gives us that same that same love, that same understanding, that same safety. Steve and I used to tell the boys when they were little, they'd play hide and seek, and we'd say, we're home base. We are home base. You can bring us anything. And I hope and pray they still will, even as they become adults. But we have to take this issue to God. He is our home base. And I think that as Christians, as we move forward into some of the unknown of what the bitterness and I don't know, the anger that we're still going to see after Tuesday, we have to look to God. And I think Scripture is a great place to start. And I noticed that we read from Ephesians today. I had a piece from Ephesians 4. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear.
For somebody who's inside the system, would you talk to us about whether or not it looks the same as this separate thing that it looks like on TV to us? When we see this tribal kind of battle between Republicans and Democrats, you guys work in the business.
Yep.
Is it different there? Is it any
For some,
there?
it is. And it is when we honor, and that was going to finish, we honor the presence of God in each one we meet. And when you see the Christians and the Jewish members in the United States Senate and in the U.S. House of Representatives where I served, Democrat or Republican, who honor the presence of God in everyone that they meet. Because we serve the same God. We have a difference. But when you see that, you see long-lasting friendships that rise above what happens here. And what's happening here is all this talk that we hear about here. We know what our tongue can do. We know the damage that it can cause. And it's created hate, and it's created a lot of things from both sides. Instead of talking about how we work together. But some of my best friends were Republicans. You know, we went to Bible study together. They were. We worked together. My ranking member when I was chairman of the Ag Committee was Saxby Chambliss. Saxby and I didn't ask each other to compromise. We looked at where our consensus was, and we built from that consensus. We said, where do we agree? And as we built out from that consensus, he gave a little, I gave a little, but we respected one another. And we respected one another enough to say, I've gone as far as I can go. And then we were able to do what we had agreed on. We passed 4 bills out of the Ag Committee. Not just the Ag Committee, but off the floor. A nutrition bill. A nutrition bill that we passed by voice vote in the United States Senate that was not happening in 2010. And it happened because we were collaborative and we found a consensus as opposed to the compromise. And I would say, yes, there is that element there, but it's small and it's in the middle. And the middle gets ostracized, it gets beaten up. There's 2 extremes that believe they know all the answers. And I just think as Christians, we have to be the ones that say, we believe in you. No matter what your religion is, we believe in you as a child of God. And we want to work with you. And I still go to the Senate Bible study. It's an interesting group. There's only about 8 of us at one time. Well, and there's never 8 at one time, but there's really only 8 that go. And the most unlikely of any that you would think of. About 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And the pastor, or the chaplain, former Navy admiral, well, not former, he's currently an admiral, but he's also the chaplain of the Senate. And the one thing he says to us is, get your daily dose of the Word. Get your daily dose of the Word. The Word will bring you back. Whether it's in Ephesians and talking about let no evil talk be a part of who you are as a Christian and what you want to do and how you want to affect things that are going on. 2 Timothy has some real interesting things in it. If you want to look at chapter 3 or then on to chapter 4, the chapter 3 really gets at us. and tells us what's going on out there in the world. And then chapter 4 brings us home and says, what is it we can do? These are things that I think as a Christian, I have a responsibility to my family and to my fellow Christians, to my country, to be that kind of person that will look for consensus and move the ball forward. So it's a good question, excellent question. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No, not at all. Let me take, I want to allow enough room for questions. Let me take a stab at what we all ought to do after the election. I think we all know, that the country is going to have a period of reconciliation. I personally worry that there's going to be a lot of bitterness, even violence, which is something that I worry about. But the question is, what can we all do? And I'm not sure I can give you a list of things, but at least I have some general ideas in that I don't think, and I might be wrong about this, because it may be the people who I hang out with, which is sort of part of the problem I hang out with. There's a lot of people in the middle who are moderates who get along with each other. But I mean, my sense is that here in Northern Virginia, we are, and particularly probably in here, are not as divided as in other places in the country. We do know that the rest of the country really is divided. I mean, I know, and many of you here know, I wrote a letter of former national security officials expressing our views on Mr. Trump, and I got a lot of hate mail from the rest of the country, which really surprised me. Voicemails, emails, letters, which were really truly hateful, threatening my family, and various other things. So I realize there's a lot of anger out in the rest of the country, and I think we can't just sit by and say, well, that's not us, and we're just going to pray about it and watch. That's where I feel that we as individuals, but also as members of this church, do have some responsibility. I think we have civic responsibility, we have Christian responsibility, and I actually think this might be just me as a sort of a cradle Episcopalian. I think we actually have particular responsibility as Episcopalians. And some of you may disagree with this, but this was a church that goes back to our founding fathers. It was there at the time of the Revolution. It tends to be a very intellectual thinking church. But whether you believe in that or not, I think we do have responsibility to try to support our institutions of government. One of the things that has come out of this election that I think is I'm sure disturbing to me and Blanche and probably to many people in this room is just how negatively people feel towards the government, that trust in government, confidence in government, were not high to begin with, has been going down and down and down. And I think that we as Christians, we as members of St. Mary's, we as Episcopalians can't just sort of watch that and just say, talk to each other over dinner and say, well, that's unfortunate, but that's not my fault. That's the fault of people out in Kansas or Oklahoma or wherever, and I'm just going to hope that it gets better. The question is then, well, what can we do if we were not the ones who caused this, and actually we here, many of whom are government employees, actually do trust the government? Then you say, well, what can I do? Unfortunately, I don't have a really good answer to that question, but I'll throw out a few things, and maybe we can actually have a conversation about that. At the most basic level, but I'm not gonna end there. I want to thank Andrew for reminding us that in addition to the weekly prayers of the people, where we pray for people in positions of public trust, that we do have these prayers in the back of the prayer book for our national life. There's a reason that that's there. Our ministers who put this together did not separate church and state altogether. They could have kept that out altogether and said, national life is one thing, church life is something else. But we have some very robust prayers in the back of the hymnal, or back of the prayer book, that are there for a reason. For a month or more, we have been together saying one of them, but there are others. And I would encourage you to look at them. Blanche, here's one for senators and representatives, and those who make our laws in states, cities, and towns. Give courage, wisdom, and foresight to provide for the needs of all our people and to fulfill our obligations in the community of nations. I like that part as an international person. But there are other ones here. There are prayers for sound government. So I encourage you to look at those. Andrew, I encourage us to use those for the rest of the year. But that's just what we can do here at home. I do encourage each one of us to prayerfully consider, what can you do? And is it inviting people who you think may slightly disagree with you over for dinner? One of the things that I've been saying for a year, I tend to hang out with the diplomatic community because I do international, to encourage our ambassadors, our great conveners. If you are the British ambassador and you invite people to dinner, they will generally come. Although Blanche can tell me there may be people now who are so sort of suspicious of international relations that if they get an invitation from the British ambassador to the lovely house on Massachusetts Avenue, that they won't come. But hopefully to your houses in Arlington, invite your friends, stimulate conversation. Don't just sit and watch the train wreck. Do something about it. Try to bring people together yourself. Most of us do not have the opportunity to get out of Arlington, but if you have chances to, when you are traveling, to go to church, talk to people. I talk a lot at law schools and universities. One thing I do not do enough of is, frankly, to get off the coasts and try to get into the heartland and to take my own advice. But I encourage people here, don't just sit here and complain that things are bad. Try to do your small part. One thing, contribute money. I mean, most of us right now are contributing to important but smaller causes. Whether it's the environment or for children or the homeless. These are really important things. But right now, our social fabric is fraying in a really bad way. And this gets to my point where I do think that we can't just sit at home at St. Mary's and say, well, we're going to stay in our cocoon at St. Mary's and have a good Christian Episcopal life while the country's social fabric falls apart. Whether it's contributing money to something that's going to try to bring people together, think about that. I'll tell you, I'll end on this. Something that I am going to do, I've already begun to reach out, is to try to, I actually just talked to John Warner about this a couple days ago when he called me. I want to get some of our major foundations, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, Pew, MacArthur, who have tended to focus on other problems, whether it's education, the environment, is it Pew that would make a more just and verdant world? I mean, I want a more just and verdant world too, but I also do not want the U.S. government to fall apart so that we do not have government anymore. So I want the foundations actually to start putting some money into trying to rebuild public trust. The federal government cannot stick up for itself. We're actually prohibited. So there are no public service advertisements that go out and tell people where national parks come from, where roads and bridges come from. And so there are
My dad used to do that.
There are people who think that they just grow on trees. And so I think that foundations have a responsibility to go out, and you can contribute to those. So you may disagree with that point, but I think you take my larger point is think about what each of us can do individually as Christians, as Episcopalians, as members of St. Mary's to try to rebuild this public trust after the election.
I want to thank John and Blanche not only for this morning, but also for agreeing to spearhead how we actually go forward. So you'll be hearing from them again.